One of the biggest mistakes I feel business owners make when it comes to hiring in general really comes down to a mismatch in expectations, and usually that mismatch is quite large. So what do I mean by this? Most shop owners obviously would have the dream that they would bring somebody in to work for them who's going to put forth the same level of elbow grease they already put into their own business. If that's your expectation, you need to take that and throw it out the window. That's going to be rule zero. You're hiring somebody to fulfill a job role, and that's not the same as cutting somebody in as a partner. I'm going to show you the way that I think about it personally, how I have hired, and a little bit about how I adjust schedules and look at what is the best use for different people's skill sets. So I have right here my idea of compartmentalization in a bike shop. There's going to be 4 main hats: the mechanic, the sales associate, the tech, and the administrator. So the mechanic's going to be whoever's heading up the service department, doing quote calls, figuring out the specific needs of specific bikes that come in, what parts need to be ordered, keeping that contact loop with the customer as their bike is being worked on. So this is definitely the person that has thousands of hours of essentially the trade skill that is being a bicycle mechanic. They're going to be someone who can independently run a busy service department, of course with the help of some techs unless you're a smaller shop. But by and large, this is going to be the most skilled labor that's tied to your shop. A tough thing to outsource. Often the case is that the mechanic is also the owner of the store, unless it's a larger store, in which case they may have some other mechanics on payroll. Next is going to be what I would argue is the easiest hat to pass off to someone else, which is the sales associate role. However, I do see quite often a mistake that's made with this one. You're trying to train your sales associate effectively as a mechanic. Now, a mechanic's going to be a great sales associate in that they're going to be able to answer any technical questions that may come their way, but usually their time is better spent in the back wrenching on bikes versus talking to customers. The sales associate can actually get by with a very base level understanding of bikes in general. It's more important that they are a people person. They need to be able to relate to people, read the room, see where they're at, identify their needs, and they don't necessarily have to be getting into conversations about drivetrain components or head tube angles. The cool thing about that is it makes this person easier to train as they rely more heavily on soft skills. And as long as they are working alongside a mechanic in the back, then there can be somebody to step in and rescue them if they ever get tripped up with more technical questions. For the third hat, I've separated tech from mechanic for a specific reason. And again, it's because finding an independently able mechanic is an advanced trade skill, and often you will have people working in shops that they can turn a wrench on bikes a little bit, but they can't independently run a service department. This is going to be somebody who can jump in with the sales associate to maybe do things like fixing a flat, making adjustments to the handlebars or the seat in order to fit a bicycle to a potential customer. I have this separate as tech, but really you could put / sales associate. They're not going to be quite as specialized as a sales associate in those soft skills per se, where this person is really just, how do I build rapport with the people that walk in the door? But this one, the tech is a little bit in between these first 2 roles. So a little bit of a jack of all trades, but a master of none. Last is going to be administrator, and this is a broad role because this is going to be essentially the person that keeps things running in the background. This is going to be doing inventory, any paperwork associated with the business, dealing with accountants, licensing, things of that nature. And again, in smaller shops where the owner is the mechanic, they may also be the administrator. And so that's kind of where I want to start from today, because I am one of those smaller shops where I am the mechanic and the administrator. I want to talk a little bit about how I've outsourced these roles and how I use that in my scheduling, and even allow myself some days off while the shop is open, even though there's not a mechanic present. So the first thing I like to think about with hiring is which roles are easier to fill, easier to train, easier to replace, And essentially, you don't have to be as diehard dependent on the person who's filling that role for you. When I think about it in that framework, I immediately go to, I need to hire and train sales associates. If I can successfully outsource this portion of my business, I can effectively become more efficient as a mechanic. Essentially, I'm buying back some of my own time that I would be utilizing towards sales, so that I effectively get more mechanic hours too, because I can spend more time wrenching. Now, there's a million ways to do this. You can take a complete opposite approach and hire a mechanic first in interest of buying back some of your time so you could spend more of it on the sales floor. For me, I'm looking at what is the easiest role to fill first, and then once I have successfully outsourced that, then I will look elsewhere to see where I can buy back more of my time. But I want to focus today on these two roles because I believe in most shops it is the first two that you want to attack. And what a lot of people do is they hire that salesperson with the intention of plugging in all the mechanical knowledge into their brain. And I'm here to tell you that you don't necessarily have to do that. I have found great success in training those who can cover the basics, which as it turns out covers approximately 80% of the conversations that come into the shop. And so only a small percentage of those customer interactions end up bleeding back through to the mechanic. This separates the roles for easier training and saves a ton of your mechanic's time, which in many shops is the most valuable resource. In my experience, I can train and plug in a sales associate within a period of about 2 months, and it's because I don't focus too heavily on bringing their bike knowledge up to the level of a mechanic. The important things are their soft skills, that they can be friendly and relatable to people, and in the inevitable event that a technical question comes their way, they can appropriately relay that question to the right person. At the end of the day, if they can segue you to the person who has the answer, then they were just as helpful as if they had all that information plugged into their head in the first place. So if you're like me and you're not a large-scale shop with a team of 10 or 15 people, and you're just kind of getting into that stage of having a couple part-timers, I would heavily advise you focus on these middle two roles. Don't put too much pressure on this person to have all the knowledge of a mechanic, because in all honesty, it takes thousands of hours of hands-on experience in order to get to that point where you can answer the question, oh, what derailleur do I need to switch to if I go from a 30-tooth to a 36-tooth cassette? These are the types of questions that apply to less than 1% of customer interactions, and to attempt to train your sales associate to be prepared for all of them is only going to serve to overwhelm your own employee. I think this framework also sets more appropriate expectations for your employees as well. The way that I like to think about it is each of my employees is at best, the best that I can expect from them is that they are going to wear one of these hats. And anybody who wears one of these hats may make between $15 and $17 an hour. If you're lucky enough to find an employee who can effectively wear two of these hats, you should absolutely not be shy about increasing their compensation for what they're doing, as you have an 8 out of 10 employee, and those are rare. So like how I mentioned in my other video about hiring faster and promoting fastest, if you find an employee that can successfully fill two of these roles, I would highly recommend you compensate them fairly. And should you happen to find an employee that can wear 3 or more of these hats, then you need to count every single day you have them as lucky, because they are capable of running a business on their own, and it's probably only a matter of time before they end up doing that for themselves. Don't be the employer that hires someone for $15 an hour and expects them to fill some level of all of these roles. It is a gross mismatch of expectations versus compensation. And I know that it sounds silly, but a lot of business owners out there, not just in the bike industry, end up doing just that. If you're just dipping your feet into hiring, focus on this role right here and understand that they don't need to have all the technicalities. Mainly look for the soft interpersonal skills in your interviews. Oftentimes, what can benefit a bike shop is hiring somebody who is not a bike person, as they become the relatable one for 80% of your customer base. So I hope this provided a general framework. This is how I think about hiring. And for the many shops out there that are still one-man shows, but they're thinking about dipping their feet into getting help, please just avoid the pitfall of mismatching your expectations between an employee and an owner. If you can set that framework in your mind before your first hire, you will save yourself and, quite frankly, your employees a lot of stress.